Canadian embassy in Ottawa, the old joke. So it's it's basically a book that just looks at Canada's role, not in propping up authoritarian governments or dictatorships, but in actually overthrowing governments, passively or actively. And so we detail more than 20 examples in the book. It's relevant, right? It's a historic book, but it's relevant. We have a situation where we have last month Justin Trudeau participating in this big conference around democracy and coming out with this statement about how democracies around the world are facing threats, from foreign actors trying to influence election results to malicious cyber activity to disinformation. The Prime Minister reaffirmed Canada's unwavering commitment to protecting and strengthening democratic institutions at the Summit for Democracy. And then they announced a couple $1 million for projects to counter foreign interference, democracy promotion. So we have a government, the Trudeau government, that says regularly that they believe in democracy. And that is only, and that they promote democracy. That's only believable if you just erase what they actually do, right? And if you look at it, you know that in the fall of 2019, Canada supported the ouster of the Trudeau government supported the ouster of the first ever Indigenous president of Bolivia, a majority Indigenous country. You have the Canadian government criticizing Yves Morales. You have the Canadian government supporting this organization, American States Electoral Mission, that claimed there was problems with tabulation, which gave momentum to these opposition protests that ultimately led to the military intervening. You had Canadians part of the OAS Electoral Mission, which later has been found out to be totally fraudulent in how they operated, and their claims of improper vote counting. You have Chrystia Freeland, who was then Canada's foreign minister, saying Canada stands with Bolivia and the democratic will of its people. We note the resignation of President Morales and will continue to support Bolivia during this transition and the new elections. Right, so basically saying that the ousted elected president, this was like a step forward for democracy. And then for the next year, we back this far right Christian Agnes, as first of all they kill protesters, secondly they avoid holding elections, and then when the popular mobilization gets so strong to force them to hold elections, what happens? Morales' political party wins the vast majority of the elected positions. And it's confirmed that this was a coup. And Canada did not a massive role, but a substantive role, very clear role in ousting the government. Similarly, more recently, in Peru, in December of 2022, you had elected leftist president Pedro Castillo, who was ousted. And you had, on the day of that taking place, you had Canadian officials at the organization American States supporting this, saying this was a step forward for democracy. And then over the next 2 months, while the replacement government kills about 60 mostly Indigenous protesters opposing the coup, you have the Canadian government, Melanie Joly, the foreign minister, as well as the Canadian ambassador in Lima, working very hard to strengthen diplomatically the usurper government. And they have like more than a half dozen meetings with different ministers in this new replacement government. Melanie Joly tweets out, spoke with Peru's foreign minister, Ana Cecilia Gervasi, to reiterate our support for the transitional government of President Boluarte. So giving this diplomatic endorsement of this coup. And now, conversely, most countries in the hemisphere didn't do that, took a very different position, and were actually trying to isolate the replacement government. So again, this is not a massive Canadian involvement, but clear Trudeau government undermining of or undermining elected government, but more specifically consolidating a unelected replacement government. Another example of the Trudeau government's hostility towards democracy is with regards to Venezuela. And in Venezuela, this is at a much more intense level. And with Venezuela, the Trudeau government worked aggressively, stunningly, quite frankly, to oust Nicolas Maduro's government. And there are many facets to that. They brought Venezuelan officials to the International Criminal Court. So while we oppose investigations of Israeli officials, we're saying that the Venezuelan officials are more responsible for more human rights violations than the Israeli officials, right? Like, it's beyond belief, ridiculous. We helped set up the Lima Group, right, of governments opposed to Maduro government back in 2017, and we hosted meetings of the Lima Group to build international opposition to the Maduro government. Sanctions, 4 rounds of sanctions. We had this special advisor, just a former diplomat who was rehired just to oversee for 2 years Canada's campaign to overthrow Maduro's government. And then this whole Juan Guaido affair, where this marginal opposition politician self-declares himself president of the country in a park. And we played a very important role in building opposition support within the Venezuelan opposition support for Juan Guaido, and also building international support for this whole Guaido effort. And you have Trudeau, after Guaido declares himself president, you have Trudeau, when he meets with the leader of Japan, talking about how they need to back Guaido. Spain, literally dozens of international meetings that Trudeau has, calls, where he's pushing countries around the world to get behind this whole Juan Guaido as the legitimate president of the country. So in the case of Venezuela, in that case, that's an unsuccessful coup effort, but in that case, it's a very aggressive Trudeau government role in trying to oust a elected legitimate president. So the idea that Justin Trudeau, Melanie Joly can claim that an important principle of their foreign policy is advancing democracy, it just doesn't align with the facts. And the facts are that they, not only are they more than happy to work with, sell arms to the Saudi monarchy, right? Work with authoritarian repressive governments. But in fact, when there are governments that pursue policies that are not to the liking of the Trudeau government or the Washington, they're willing to participate in ousting elected governments. This, unfortunately, is a pattern in Canadian history, and so we detail about 10 examples, what we call like passive Canadian support for U.S. usually or entirely U.S. backed coups. So for Mossadegh in Iran, Arbenz in Guatemala in the mid-1950s. The more significant Canadian coup efforts would be something like Patrice Lumumba in Congo. People are probably familiar with Patrice Lumumba, was independence leader of Congo. He wanted something that went beyond just political decolonization, but in fact that the vast mineral resources of the Congo would be in the for Congolese, which is a pretty reasonable idea. And immediately the Belgians worked to undermine him. Washington was not a fan of Lumumba, and Canada played, after the Americans and the Belgians, played probably the third most important role in Lumumba's demise. And we led a UN mission. There were about 2,000 Canadian troops that were part of UN mission in the early 1960s in Congo. And we worked to undercut Lumumba by supporting all the money, the aid that went through the UN, which was basically worked to undermine Lumumba. When he was ousted by the president, very dubious, constitutionally dubious affair, we recognized that. We blocked Lumumba from getting supports when he ultimately turns towards Soviets for support. We blocked that. And then when Lumumba was put under house arrest, he escapes, he flees, trying to rebuild his power base, get to his power base. It's actually the Canadian who tells Mobutu, who's the head of the military, where Lumumba is, what to basically says, take an aircraft. There's actually Canadians on the aircraft, recapture Lumumba, and not many days later, he's killed and his body's dissolved in acid. And I think there's one or two teeth that were recently retrieved and given to his family. So in the case of Lumumba in Congo, this was something much more significant, beyond passive, fairly significant Canadian role in this coup that's now, for anyone involved in sort of Pan-Africanist kind of politics, Lumumba is obviously a heroic figure. Another one that I'm sure people are familiar with is Salvador Allende in Chile, right? This just passed the 50th anniversary of the coup in Chile. Well, Canada played substantial role in not only ousting, not only supporting the coup, but destabilizing Salvador Allende. So we cut off all funding, right, through the Export Development Canada, any aid. We supported IMF cutting off funding. And then immediately after Pinochet takes power, we restart funding. We support IMF funding to Chile. Bilateral assistance likewise. There's the infamous cable from Canada's ambassador, Andrew Ross, just after the coup, where he says, quote, "Reprisals and searches have created panic atmosphere affecting particularly expatriates, including the riffraff of the Latin American left, to whom Allende gave asylum. The country has been on a prolonged political binge under the elected Allende government, and the junta has assumed the probably thankless task of sobering Chile up." Sobering Chile up, of course, meant killing, terrorizing thousands, tens of thousands. This is while there are tens of thousands being held at the football stadium in Santiago, and we're talking about sobering Chile up. That Pinochet is going to do that. We recognize Pinochet within 3 weeks, and then there's big Canadian investment, mining companies do well off of the Pinochet dictatorship. Now, the Canadian government has shown its willingness to help overthrow governments, even when the consequences are likely to be significant. And we're seeing that today. There's a few of the major kind of international issues in the making news that, to a certain extent, have their roots in Canadian-backed coup. So we've, last few weeks, couple months, Haiti has gotten back onto, into the news, and all these stories about gangs control most of Port-au-Prince and insecurity, and we need a new foreign intervention in Haiti, and this kind of stuff. And a lot of this is true. Some of it's hyped up, but the
there is real serious insecurity problems in Port-au-Prince, and basically people who are very impoverished. On top of that, have all this insecurity problem and people being displaced and stuff like that. So it is real. It's a real human tragedy. But what's basically entirely omitted from the Canadian media is the roots of this disintegration in Canadian policy. And there's many facets to Canadian policy. The one that we deal with in the book is the 2004 coup, where Canadian troops literally invaded to help the US Marines put the elected president in the middle of the night on a plane and dump him in the Central African Republic, right? That's actually literally what happened. That Bertrand, Aristide, the most popular politician in Haitian history, or at least since Toussaint Louverture or Jean-Jacques Dessalines, that he was forced in the middle of the night onto a plane, and those Canadian Special Forces, JTF2, that were securing the Port-au-Prince airport when this happened. And this was the culmination of a multi-year campaign, which Canada was right at the center of destabilizing, of the government, of building international consensus. I say international, I mean imperial consensus, to oust not just the elected president, but thousands of elected officials. So the roots of this campaign is a real impressive feat of the propaganda system. The roots of the campaign against Aristide actually go back to elections in May of 2000 that he didn't participate in and that he didn't oversee. So there was elections for Senate positions, Parliament, mayors across the country, for like 7,000 positions across the country. And Aristide's Famille Lavallaire's party wins more than 70%. They win overwhelmingly. The opposition, and the presidential elections was supposed to take place later in the year. The opposition cries foul and claims that there's this vote counting question, this really technical question around the votes on some of the positions for Senate, and they then use this to discredit this election, which is probably the best election in Haitian history, probably the most highest participation, most democratic process in Haitian history. They use this technicality around the voting, the tabulation method around some Senate seats, to then say that this whole election is dubious, and that therefore the upcoming presidential election is dubious. Canada plays a role through the Organization of American States, through our officials actually going down, in creating this kind of climate of discrediting these elections. Then these elections are this discrediting this election is used to discredit the presidential election, which no one believed that Aristide wouldn't win by a landslide. And we start cutting off. We cut off our funding. So World Bank money that had already been agreed to the Haitian government is cut off on the grounds that there's a dubious election. In his first international meeting after being elected, at the Summit of the Americas in April of 2001 in Quebec City, Jean Chrétien lectures Aristide on all his democratic deficiency. Start this whole process of delegitimizing these elections, delegitimizing the Aristide government and the thousands of other elected officials. And this is very successful. We then cut off bilateral assistance almost entirely. What money we're supporting goes into opposition groups that are destabilizing the government. On October 31st and February 1st of 2003, the Chrétien government hosts the Ottawa Initiative on Haiti, where it is later reported on by L'Actualité magazine, which is Quebec's equivalent to Maclean's, that the high-level officials from the Bush administration in the US minister from the French government, from the Organization of American States. They decide that Aristide must go, Haiti should be put under UN trusteeship, and the Haitian military should be recreated. 13 months later, Aristide is forced out by the US, France, and Canada. Haiti is put under UN trusteeship for arguably even right until today in a certain sense, but certainly for 15 years. And the Haitian military has been partly recreated. So when we look at the breakdown, political breakdown in Haiti today, there's no elected official, right? We look at the security breakdown in the country. Part of the roots of that are the 2004 coup, and then what comes out of the 2004 coup. So, for instance, the core group. Are people familiar with the core group? Ever heard of the core group? Okay, some people in the room. Core group. Basically, the core group is the white ambassadors that get together and tell Haitians what to do. So, the U.S., Canada dominate it, but also the French, usually a Spanish, Brazilian, OAS, and an EU official. And so when Jovenel Moïse was killed, the president, about 3 years ago, the core group appointed Ariel Henry, the leader who has not been able to return to Haiti over the past month. That's kind of part of the breakdown that we hear about in the news. The core group appointed him through a tweet. Like literally, the leader of Haiti was appointed 3 years ago through a tweet. And so the coup of 2004 led to the breakdown of the breakdown of the Haitian state, but it also led to a substantive increase in the power of Washington, Ottawa to control Haiti. And this core group is what dominates Haitian affairs. So Canadian audiences, almost no one knows what the core group is, but in Haiti, everyone knows what the core group is. So the Canadian government, from the perspective of this book or this talk, the point is that the Canadian government is willing to help overthrow elected governments, even when it's expected, or certainly not a surprise, that it will lead to massive human suffering. It will lead to have quite substantive negative consequences. Another example of that is with regards to Ukraine, right? You know, we just passed the two-year anniversary, those attention, 2-year anniversary of Russia's invasion, and I'm on record many times saying I think that Russia's invasion is a violation of international law, and should be criticized. But the part that we ignore, we also in this 2-year anniversary is the 10-year anniversary of the coup against Yanukovych in 2014, right? And the coup against Yanukovych is what leads Russia to seize Crimea, is what leads to war in east of the country, and ultimately creates context of a low-level proxy war between Canada, well, the Anglosphere of NATO, so Canada, the US, and Britain, vis-a-vis Russia. And that goes on from at least 2015 until Russia invades in a significant way. And but the roots of this that is the coup, and the coup against Yanukovych in 2014. Canada plays a substantive role, and there's this idea out there that the Canada only supports ousting Yanukovych once the Maidan protests get going, right? I assume people may be familiar with the Maidan protests, late 2013, popular mobilization against Yanukovych. The elected president, and I should say, the elected president, where Canadian electoral observers were dispatched, were part of finding that the election of Yanukovych was a legitimate election in 2010, even though we opposed him. And we opposed him because he supported neutrality, right? He didn't want to join NATO. He didn't want to join the West's policy against Russia.
But so there's this idea out there that we just supported the Maidan protest, but that's not true. We began destabilizing Yanukovych from right get-go. And when Harper does a trip to Kyiv in 2010, early in Yanukovych's term, he's also beginning this whole demonization process. And he brings all these people from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress who were really hostile to Yanukovych. And there's it's actually in the Kingston Whig Standard that Lubodor Lucic, he Royal Military College professor. He has this op-ed. He goes on this trip with Harper to Ukraine, and his op-ed where he argues that Harper is the real Ukrainian nationalist. The elected president of Ukraine is not. It's Harper that's real, because he has this more complicated view of Ukrainian history, Yanukovych, around things like the Holodomor and all that kind of stuff, and so he basically argues that Harper is the so there's this whole process that we begin early in Yanukovych's mandate, and then it picks up. Right, we would bring in some sanctions, and then it picks up as the Maidan protests get going, where you have Canada's the spokesperson of the Canadian Embassy in Kyiv is a prominent anti-government activist, right? That's not normal diplomatic kind of affairs. You don't your day job is not the spokesperson of the Canadian government, and you're on a night you work to overthrow the government. Come on, that's not the standard thing. You wouldn't accept that here. Then you have John Baird, right? In early December, in December of 2013, he goes to the Maidan Square protest, and Paul Grod, the head of Ukrainian Canadian Congress, announces from the podium that the Canadian Foreign Minister is at the protest against the elected government. Again, that's intervening in the internal affairs of the country. And then later in the Maidan protest, the Canadian Embassy, this is Canadian press reports, the Canadian Embassy becomes a base of opposition for more than a week, of opposition protesters, because the Canadian Embassy is right next to the Maidan Square. And then when Yanukovych is ousted, we immediately start, funding comes in. Harper makes like 3 trips in I think a year, 18-month period. John Baird makes trips, all designed to sort of consolidate the coup. And what are the consequences? Right? The consequences are the horror. This doesn't exculpate Russia, but part of the consequence is this terrible war. And this wasn't something that, oh, what a surprise. This was foreseeable, that doing this was going to lead to a reaction from Russia, was going to lead to a reaction within, so not just a question of, international geopolitics, but internal divisions within Ukraine, between Eastern Ukraine and Western Ukraine stuff. But nonetheless, we pursued that. Another example of an issue that's getting lots of, big media issue, that there's some of the roots are Canada's hostility towards democracy, is regard to Gaza. And when Hamas wins legislative elections, Canada is the first country after Israel to cut off assistance. Right? And when there's a Palestinian Unity government, we had nothing to do with it. Try to destabilize it, to bust it up, and that of course is successful. We then, when there's division, then there's fighting between Fatah and Hamas, we start supporting significantly the Palestinian Authority forces. And the effect of this policy is to further isolate Gaza, obviously to further demonize Hamas. Hamas takes control of Gaza, kind of as a reaction to these policies. And then that, of course, justifies more deepening of Israeli siege of Gaza, and then the bombardments. I mean, it didn't just begin recently, right? There's the horrible one beginning in 2008 and 2014 and 2019. You know, there's a whole series of it. And so our policy, our hostility towards a Palestinian democracy enables Israel to you know, slaughter and to isolate and to siege and to Palestinians in Gaza. So now there's other elements I can get into that if people want to about Canada's role in supporting Zionism. It's a long history in supporting Israel today, but our hostility towards democracy, Palestinian democracy, in a small way, contributes to some of the horrors that we're seeing today. Now, the book is obviously an attempt to better understand Canadian foreign policy, to have some sort of historical rooting of Canadian foreign policy. It's in part, on a personal level, it's in part a little bit of a way to respond to a very common question that I've gotten probably, it can't be less than 100 times, around Canada's role in the coup in Haiti in 2004. And I've just been asked so many times, so why? People have a hard time wrapping their head around the idea of why would we care enough to, destroy democracy in Haiti and terrorize people there that already have very difficult lives. And there's many parts of the answer to that, but one of the responses to that is this is not an aberration, right? This is like a consistent pattern, right? When the U.S. empire targets a social democratic minded government to oust them, we support that. That's the norm. It's not so we shouldn't be surprised about that. And obviously we need to understand this, see the pattern to understand that. The other part, in terms of a current day importance, I'd say, is that we hear a lot about this conflict, right? We're in conflict with China and Russia and Iran because we believe in democracy and they're authoritarian, right? We hear that a lot. Well, if you know that Canada's consistently supported overthrowing governments, it makes it a little bit hard to believe that that's really what our conflict with Russia or China or Iran is about, right? And so that's important for people to, because then you go look for other answers to that question. What's really going on here? And I think you'll generally find the answer in geopolitical rationale, maybe some corporate rationale. Another part of it, of a sort of the current day importance, is this whole foreign interference kind of craze that our media, especially the Globe and Mail, is really all obsessed with, right? Where this big thing about foreign interference, this huge deal. Where, we had a whole big public inquiry. It's this terrible thing. This is not an argument. I think foreign interference should be combated. The UN Charter says that nothing should authorize intervention into matters essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state. Self-determination is a core principle of international law. But we have no moral standing to bemoan foreign interference, right? You just take the most minuscule look at Canada's role in Haiti, and you know the just incredible hypocrisy of this freak out about foreign interference, right? So the media they'll go on endlessly about Chinese interference into Canada, and they won't talk basically at all about Canada's interference around the world. And so I think this book, in that sense, it helps kind of push back and put that whole concern into a bit of better light. Now, towards a conclusion, people wonder like why, right? Why is Canada involved in these coups? And I think the simplest thesis would be when there are governments that pursue socialistic-minded reforms that anger the U.S. empire, Canada supports ousting them. That would be the sort of simplest kind of explanation for most of the Canadian coups, back coups. But it's more than that, right? You know, I mentioned the Yanukovych. I don't think Yanukovych was about capitalism per se. It was about NATO, right? And it was about the fact that we want to turn Ukraine into a bastion of Western power on Russia's border, and you had a president in place that wasn't really on board for that. If you look at some of the coups in the hemisphere, you find that, you know, yes, the whole being sort of like socialistic minded or social democratic minded, that's a big part of it, but it's also about like regional integration. So, for instance, you know, with Morales and Lugo in Paraguay and Zelaya in Honduras in 2009, we played a fairly significant role in Honduras in 2009. Part of it was that they were building the Community of Latin American countries, CELAC, that was a replacement for the Organization of American States. It was breaking away from North American domination of the hemisphere. Similarly, with regards to Lumumba in Congo or Nkrumah in Ghana in 1966, part of that was about busting up Pan-Africanism and trying to build, you know, African structures to move away from, you know, European colonial domination of the continent. So part of the coup effort is that. Another part, I think, if you look, you know, in kind of bigger picture sense, is that the Canadian state has a deeply anti-democratic history in terms of destroying First Nations governments, right? And we see that, right, you know, like even, you know, basically coup efforts on reserves right up until today, but a whole long history of that. So the book is about building, as my previous books became foreign policy, about building critical consciousness around Canada's role in the world, and as we put it, you know, the first step is always to know what our government's doing. No, actually, one other part is that seeing the pattern of coups offers us the possibility of stopping them, right? Because they usually aren't like an overnight process. Usually there's a certain pattern. There's this diplomatic isolation, there's this destabilization, there's a media campaign, et cetera, and so seeing that, knowing that that's the pattern, as we detail in the book, different elements of that pattern, that seeing that play out in the here and now offers us opportunity to stop that process. So that's another current day part. But the first step, of course, is always knowledge. And so while this is a book about Canada's long fight against democracy, it's offered as a handbook for democracy. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, folks. We're just going to take a beat here, and I'm going to bring actually some food out, and we'll rearrange some of those things there. And then we'll do some more Q&A related stuff, obviously. Maybe just raise your hand, given that there's quite a few of us. But other than that, that's all. So if you need to go to the bathroom or anything, please feel free. We'll give it 5 minutes or so. Yep. Yeah, sure. I'm going to clear up that table.